Okay, I think we are live now. So we'll be starting the discussion. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to some of you. We are getting started today with this great we have great guests to start this panel discussion about Uyghur women in East Turkestan. It is my pleasure to be sharing the stage with wonderful guest speakers whom I admire very much. My name is Zumratay Erkin. I am the Program and Advocacy Manager of the World Uyghur Congress, but also the newly elected chair of the Women's Committee of WUC, which is organizing today's event in partnership with the Uyghur Human Rights Project. We are here today to celebrate International Women's Day. This must also serve as an urgent reminder that gender equality and women's rights are ongoing fights everywhere. As a young Uyghur woman myself, I cannot help but to think about all my aunts, cousins, and elders in my homeland whose rights are brutally violated every day. We are here today to talk about these violations and why they matter in a global context, but also to talk about what can be done to uplift and protect those rights and the voices of those defending these rights. We also want to highlight the extreme bravery and resilience of women of East Turkestan. This is actually this second event of our series of events to highlight and celebrate women on this day. Just this Saturday on March 6th, we organized another event where we gathered 8 women camp survivors from East Turkestan to share about their own experiences and also their urgent pleas to the international community. And the event was extremely successful. They shared very concrete recommendations with the audience. So we're hoping to get the event translated, hopefully in English, and make that available in the near future. So today I am delighted to be joined by 3 amazing women who are at the forefront of defending Uyghur human rights, but also just human rights generally. So first, I would like to introduce you to our speakers today. The first speaker we have is Andrea Warden, who is a human rights advocate, translator, and writer, whose current work focuses on the PRC party states' interactions with the UN human rights mechanisms, and most recently the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, and force and incentivize marriages in the Uyghur region. She also teaches in the East Asian Studies program at Johns Hopkins University Krieger Schools of Arts and Sciences. So welcome, Andrea. We also are joined by my wonderful colleague, Rahima Mahmoud. Rahima is a Uyghur singer, human rights activist, and translator. She has worked closely with Uyghur women survivors, translating their testimonies during the Uyghur Tribunal and working on the breaking BBC News stories on systematic rape in the camps. A prominent voice for Uyghurs in the UK, Rahima is currently the UK Director of the World Uyghur Congress and the Executive Director of Stop Uyghur Genocide, as well as the advisor to the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. So welcome, Rahima. And last but not least, we are delighted to be joined by Sophie Richardson, who serves as the China Director at Human Rights Watch. She has overseen the organization's research and advocacy on China since 2006 and has published extensively on human rights and political reform in the country and across Southeast Asia. She has testified to the Canadian Parliament, European Parliament, and the US Senate and House of Representatives. She is also the author of China, Cambodia, and the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence, which was published in December 2009. So welcome, everyone, to today's event. So I think we can get started maybe on today's discussion, which revolves around the targeted oppression of women in East Turkestan. And maybe on this topic, I would like to ask first, Andrea, you're working on a forthcoming research briefing with Uyghur Human Rights Project about forced and incentivized marriages in East Turkestan. Can you give us maybe an overview of this report, and how are forced and incentivized marriages targeting Uyghur women, and what are some of the compelling conclusions that you've reached?
Great. Thank you so much, first, to the World Uyghur Congress and the Uyghur Human Rights Project for inviting me to participate in today's discussion, and particularly UHRP for supporting this project on forced and incentivized marriages in East Turkestan, which will be published soon. Today, I will just share a few key takeaways from my research. But first, I'd like to begin by noting that it is indeed International Women's Day. Yesterday, a remarkably courageous survivor of the camps, who I believe is familiar to many of you, Andrea Warden, she spoke at a virtual event organized by Cornell University. And she mentioned International Women's Day in her remarks. And she said, generally, it was a day for celebration, but not for Uyghur women, she said. She said, for Uyghur women, it's a day of grief. She described the horrific things she experienced and saw in the camps, rape, torture, forced sterilizations, and her ongoing severe mental trauma. I believe Rahima will be speaking to some of these issues when she speaks today and shortly. But I wanted to just sort of mention the sort of the constant state of fear that Torsten described. She also mentioned this in her testimony to the CECC last Monday, and that the guards could do whatever they wanted to her and the other women detainees. This serves kind of as a backdrop to the issue of forced and incentivized marriages. The sort of alternative to not agreeing or not being not complying with a Han suitor, let's say, or a local government official who wants to, make some Han guy happy, so he or she will facilitate this marriage to a Uyghur woman. The sort of the backdrop to all of this is the constant threat and fear of the camps. So if a woman doesn't agree, she might be sent off to the camps, or her family members might be sent off to the camps. Right? So she has little agency and little free will in these situations in the Uyghur region, where single Uyghur women might be forced to marry Han men. So I just wanted to mention the reality of the camps and the horrific things that are happening there, which leads just generally, this creates a general atmosphere of coercion and fear in the Uyghur region for women. We also know from reports from Uyghur women in the diaspora that deals have been offered. The deals have been offered to the deals have been offered to Uyghur women. They can't really be refused. So the deal might be something like this, hey, marry this Han guy and we'll release a male member of your family from the camps. So the UHRP's interest in this topic was a result of the sort of a flurry of TikTok videos that emerged in 2019, showing what purported to be forced marriages between Han men and Uyghur women, particularly sort of violent images, distressed women, sort of physical force. It is just really, really disturbing. But these videos are unable to be verified, and they were promptly scrubbed from the internet after an outcry from the Uyghur diaspora. So I think the notion was to sort of try to dig a bit further into this topic, like what is actually going on in terms of incentivized and forced marriages. I wanted to recognize first, too, the important work that Darren Byler has done, which is reflected in his essay for SUP China, titled Uyghur Love in a Time of Interethnic Marriage. That was published in August 2019. And also Edward Wong of the New York Times is reporting on, in 2014, on intermarriage incentive measures in one county in the southern part of East Turkestan. And of course, the great reporting always by Radio Free Asia. So I just have a couple of minutes. I encourage everyone to take a look at the report that should be coming out fairly soon. But I wanted to highlight so both incentives and the sort of just kind of pervasive, kind of coercive environment. And sort of in a way, it's sort of a spectrum of coercion and really pressure on Uyghur women. So starting in 2014, actually in Tibet, while Chen Quanguo was the party secretary there, and following the second Xinjiang Work Forum, ethnic unity took on sort of became even more. The policies became even more aggressive. This was the era of sort of ethnic contact, exchange, and mingling that was being vigorously promoted. So ethnic mingling, intermarriage was a sort of a very important part of that, and it continues to be. The idea being, of course, that if Han and Tibetans or Han and Uyghurs intermarry, the sort of Tibetan identity will be diluted. The Uyghur identity will be diluted. The Han sort of culture and ethos and sort of as like the dominant, sort of the dominant force, right, becomes more prominent, more powerful, and the idea of the ultimate goal, of course, being sort of the Hanification of ethnic minorities and greater stability in these regions. So anyway, a similar initiative to the Tibetan initiatives that were promoted by Chen Quanguo emerged in 2014. Again, Edward Wong does a great job with and RFA reporting on this. But an interesting little interesting detail. I'm going to wrap this up actually fairly soon. Is that there was a flurry of reports on these sort of cash for marriage kind of measures that. That this one county in the southern Uyghur region was promoting, and so quickly after the New York Times and other media reported on this, those measures came down off of the local government website, and later, like a year later, in the Global Times, there was a report about some of these kind of issues, what was happening with Han and Han and Uyghur. Sort of intermarriages, and an official from this county said that they suspended the measures after "quote unquote" receiving wide external slander. But anyway, these incentives continue. They're just a little bit more. They're not as maybe sort of advertised as kind of prominent, or sort of they're more kind of they're not as kind of widely, let's say, promoted and advertised. So one of the key aspects of this was 10,000 yuan per year for an intermarriage, a Uyghur Han intermarriage, and that's now become sort of a trope for incentivized marriages. And you see that even today, headlines promoting like, hey, Han men, take a look at this, come to Xinjiang and you can marry a Uyghur woman, and we're going to give you, 10,000 yuan per year for this, as long as your marriage remains harmonious. So anyway, so local government officials involved, the CCP is involved. Chen Quanguo in his speech in Tibet said the party must be matchmakers to make this happen. And the local officials are absolutely involved in these kind of matchmaking and facilitating kind of events. Uyghur women have little choice but to comply. I want to just finish with a quote from the father of a Uyghur woman who was married clearly with sort of facilitation and pressure from the local government. And the Uyghur woman's father said this, quote, my translation: "Our family did not really accept their marriage at the beginning. After all, such marriages are very rare in the village. But the state and government are very supportive of Uyghur Han intermarriage and have even introduced many policies to encourage intermarriage, such as land, cash, and subsidies for housing, children's education, and other things. In addition, the current situation of ethnic unity is very good, and this kind of intermarriage is becoming more and more common." So the goal, of course, is the dilution of Uyghur culture, identity, and really sort of, existence. Ultimate goal is one big, unified, happy Zhonghua Minzu family. Okay, that's it. Stay tuned for the written report.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And I think, what you said I think it's just a reminder that Uyghurs have really no choice in every aspect of their lives, whether it's their private, love life, even how intrusive the government is, and looking at maybe also the mass surveillance in the privacy of their homes, and also this question of I think subsidies and the money. It just, when you look at the forced labor schemes as well, when each Chinese companies are paid this amount of money to hire Uyghur workers, it just sends this message that Uyghur lives have a price. We have a price on our head, and that we are for sale, basically, that we are not entire human beings on our own. So I think this is a message that we can, I guess, understand from the government's policies as well. So maybe moving on to Rahima, because I know that she has to leave soon for another event. So being mindful of that, I wanted to ask you, Rahima, you have worked with victims, camp survivors for years, and you were involved in the Uyghur Tribunal proceedings last year as well. And do you, in your work, working so closely with camp survivors, do you think that their brave testimonies created change? And what are some concrete examples of that? You are muted. Great. Okay. There you go.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Happy International Women's Day to all of you, and thank you for having me. So my experience as working very closely with women, at times some very painful, but very moving. To translate the testimonies of camp survivors during the Uyghur Tribunal, as it has been throughout my career as a translator, it was one of the most difficult things that I have lived, I have encountered. The women that shared their stories were breaking a lifetime of enforced silence. We know normally, especially women who experienced sexual violence. And we cannot overstate the immense strength that it took to just simply speak out. And it has invariably been these stories like, Turkistan Ziawudun, that was covered in the BBC, that have spurred the world into action. And also we know Sairagul Saudbai, who's Kazakh, who also gave a very moving testimony about this one extremely distressing incident of gang rape in public. So this personal impact of this genocide, specifically on women, has been very, very powerful. And it was following these media reports that parliamentarians, faith groups, and activists began to mobilize around the Uyghur cause, especially from my experience here in the UK. So our entire movement was a great debt to the women, and that have found the strength to share their trauma. So I know that MPs like Nusrat Ghani, who has been a champion of our cause in British Parliament, were particularly moved to action by the stories of sexual violence and gendered repression spoken by camp survivors. And these MPs drove forward the genocide amendment to the trade bill last year, and holding the government to account vote after vote. And also the stories of women survivors were repeatedly recounted in debates and discussions around this legislation. And I believe were key in the convincing certain members to rebel, especially from the Conservative Party. And even now, as we try again to push legislation through, the testimonies of survivors are the single most convincing case for action. And so it has been a very, very powerful. It is so important that the world bears witness to what the Chinese government is doing to our community, and genocide come to an end, and the world looks back shame at what a people were left to withstand. But camp survivors that have spoken publicly about their experiences have ensured that there is an undeniable record of the Chinese government's atrocities. And it means that the Uyghur genocide cannot and will not be erased from history. So it is a very, very important, even, for the final judgment of the Uyghur tribunal, to call this as genocide. So it's, I want to take this opportunity to, congratulate these women and really honor them. We should honor them. History will remember them. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, your last, appeal is also very, it's a reminder that silence is complicity, and that we must break our silences and we must protect those who are defending these rights, especially knowing that I think Uyghur defenders or any human rights defenders working against authoritarian governments are threatened on a daily basis, even if they're in exile. As we stand here, we are continuously threatened. We face reprisals. And so those challenges are enormous for these camp survivors who are often dealing with traumatic experiences. So for them to be at the forefront of this cause is also a huge weight on their shoulders as well. So we must do everything in our power to protect them and uplift their voices. And I think this is why events like these are extremely important, because it's a reminder of that responsibility that we all bear. So moving on, I think this is a good transition to also talk about maybe, some of the international reactions to these accounts. We've heard horrible accounts of the situation for Uyghur and Turkic women, and but we also know that this is only one aspect of the targeted oppression that we face as a whole community. And so my question to you, I guess, Sophie, is what do you think the international community can do to address the specific issue of gender-based violence that Uyghur and Turkic women face, especially knowing that this is a priority in terms of human rights and foreign policy for many governments? And I think this is also a good time to maybe point out that the human rights the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the UN has this morning announced that she has reached to an agreement with the government of China for an upcoming visit in May. This visit that human rights groups like ourselves, our groups have urged her office to do for years, but it's a bit too late, and we are worried about, I guess, some of the conditions around her visit, which has not been public yet. And this report that was supposed to be published months ago, that's still pending. And so in that context, where even the High Commissioner is not able to speak about this issue very openly, very explicitly or firmly, what can we expect from the international community?
Zumratai, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to join you, and on today of all days to be with you and Rahila, and think of all of the extraordinary Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz women activists we've had the privilege to learn from and work alongside. It's good to be together today. I find myself thinking a lot today about people like Rahila Dawood, scholars, feminists, activists, doctors, writers, people who are keepers of cultural and religious flames, who are at extraordinary risk and who we know are being persecuted. I think of the women that we interviewed in Kazakhstan and in other parts of the world who shared with us excruciating details about family separations, about cultural persecution, about enduring the enforced disappearances of family members, survivors of crimes against humanity, and that we come together today, just moments after the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, seems to have privileged discussions with precisely the authorities committing crimes against humanity at the expense of demonstrating solidarity with this community is disgraceful. It is disgraceful. I think unless and until the High Commissioner has the guts to follow through on her own promise to release this long-awaited report about Chinese government human rights violations across the Uyghur region, and to clarify whether she has ensured that she would, for example, have access to Professor Dawood free of reprisals, right? Those are the conditions under which a visit is acceptable, not walking off a plane in Beijing and having only a dialogue and constrained access to affected parties. That woman's job is to stand with this community and to find justice for all of the violations that it has endured. It is not to go to Beijing and Fashang Guanxi with the people who are responsible for this nightmare. Our confidence in the High Commissioner is running a little low today. And in that spirit, I offer the following suggestion, particularly around these incredibly difficult, grave violations involving gender-based violence, involving sexual violence. Now is the moment. Governments cannot wait any longer to start initiating national level prosecutions, to start moving towards universal jurisdiction cases. We have to ensure that there is accountability for appalling human rights violations. And if we can't rely on the UN human rights system to do that, that's obviously one serious problem that we can talk more about if we want to. But it means that we all need to devote more energy to some of these other mechanisms through which justice can be had. It is unacceptable that we know about these violations. These aren't allegations. These aren't suggestions. These aren't indications. We all have evidence. What we need is a competent court that's got the guts to go after the second most powerful government in the world for atrocity crimes now.
That was, I think we all agree that we actually were supposed to look at accountability measures, I think years ago. I think back in 2018, when the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination came out with this report confirming the existence of these camps and confirming the arbitrary detention of over 1 million Uyghurs and Turkic Muslims. I think the UN should have looked at that. And it's not only the High Commissioner's office is not breaking anything, breaking any news by working or publishing this report, because like you said, these are not allegations. We have evidence, and even UN independent experts, special rapporteurs, have been for years urging UN bodies and governments to do something because they have collected evidence. And I think our groups were also pushing the High Commissioner's office to look at, if she cannot get access to the region, then to gather evidence from outside, which is, there is plenty of evidence outside, because there's a important diaspora community in exile where a lot of us, have evidence, have relatives that we have lost, or, who were disappeared by the government. So I think when it was announced over the summer that this report was coming, it was an exciting moment, because we know how useful this can be, because one of the challenges that we face often when we meet with governments, with different policymakers, is that, oh, well, the UN hasn't said anything. Well, actually, the UN did say a lot of things, but the High Commissioner is not doing much on this issue. So yeah, we'll see, and hopefully with enough pressure around I guess her own mandate, she will start moving. And like you said, we're just hoping that this visit will not be instrumentalized by China, which we are very worried about. So thank you for such a comprehensive answer. And I wanted to maybe come back to this question of maybe challenges in some of the reprisals that survivors have faced. And just before maybe Rahima leaves, I wanted to ask you, when you worked with them, did they, what are some of the most challenging things that they face when they share their stories and experience with the international community? And what kind of reprisals do they face while doing so?
The first thing is the physical and the psychological trauma, which is very, very visible. All these women, for example, Saira Gul, when she came to UK, she cannot walk properly, for example. She said before she was forcibly taken to camp to work there, she was a very healthy woman. So all the traumas that she has experienced, and also, for example, Mihrgul Tursun, and I can list all of them. They all have this kind of fear. You can see they even though they are the maybe bravest of the bravest when you compare to. We know many other camp survivors, many other male camp survivors as well, but they're just too scared to come forward. Even though, all these brave women, but you can see that vulnerability. They are so vulnerable, so scared, and they all suffer from flashbacks from everyone that I spoke to. They all suffer from nightmares, flashbacks, and they need a lot of support. I believe they need years of psychological, treatment and counseling. And, I cannot imagine after experiencing such horror. Many of them said at the time they wished they could have an easy death, then continue to live another day in fear, in horror. And that just can reflect the people living in our own country, living in East Turkestan. As Andrea said, despite you're not in the camp, even in your own home, that you have taken away your ability to make your own decision who to marry, for example, is so important. A kind of decision for anyone, a lifetime decision, that even that was decided by the government. So it is a extremely horrifying, depressing, and whenever I think about them, I have tears in my eyes, and then thinking about my own sisters and, their children and their future. It really worries me. But we live with hope. We hope that these things can one day change. So that's all I can tell you. But otherwise, I will just continue. There's too much, that I can share about these women. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this response. And just one viewer just asked a question about this specific topic. Is there any kind of help that can be offered for the victims? Can you cite an example of some of the maybe like tools and resources that we can provide to these victims? And I mean, this is open for anyone to really answer. I think we talked about, Rahima, that you talked about mental health and to offer them mental support. So is there anything beyond mental health support that could be offered to these victims?
In my opinion, apart from this, the trauma, the flashbacks, also is a fear about their own family members. And, some they have children. And these are the things that wish that the governments can help to reunite them, make a really special effort to help them. I don't know how successful that can be, but at least showing that kind of effort itself would give them some kind of hope. So at least they know that the government is helping them. They are taking this issue seriously. Because apart from them, I myself, for example, I'm living in this kind of unknown situation about what happened to my family. But I learned to live with it, and at least I didn't experience those horror firsthand. So I can easily block out bad thoughts. But for them, it's a day in, day out, a kind of fear that they are living every day. I think the most important help that they can get is if they can be, reunited with their loved ones, and also to make sure that the family members are not punished because of their brave, actions. And I think one of the things we can demand from this trip, if Michelle Bash, if she can really visit under, we don't know obviously, what kind of condition. I do also fear that, she will see completely different picture, when guided by the governments. But one thing I think we can request is to visit those camps, to visit the family of these survivors, at least, without any kind of intimidation, and to see firsthand of the women like Rahila Dawood and many others, the condition they held and they've been living under. And only then I think the world can really develop a good comprehensive plan to support the survivors, as well as the Uyghurs living in exile.
I don't know if any of you wanted to also come in on this. Yes, Sophie.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. I agree entirely with everything that Rahila has just said, but I would also add that, while we know that there are certain kinds of services available for trauma, for victims of sexual violence, and I think some of the Uyghur organizations have done a great job trying to organize some of that support. I think it's an obvious project for democracies that have said they're concerned about this nightmare to work on together to ensure, access to counseling, to medical and mental health care, especially given that the community is relatively concentrated in particular locations around the world. That to start a project like that shouldn't be all that difficult, and is clearly necessary. And the longer this goes, the situation goes unremedied and unchanged, the greater that need gets. And I think that could also, work very much in parallel. It should be helping protect diaspora communities from harassment around the world. These are these are ongoing problems, and I think governments that say they care about these things should step up and actually put resources in place.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the issue of reprisals and harassment, because this is very much our reality. And as I mentioned previously, these survivors experience this very, very completely, and for them it adds another layer of trauma and going through these harassment. I remember some of these survivors who were testifying at the tribunal in London, just before they testified or after, their family members were taken to Beijing for a propaganda press conference, basically, and they were forced to defame their own relatives. And this had huge impacts on their mental health as well. So I think these are, they testify on many different occasions. And just like Andrea has previously mentioned as well, the testimony last week of Tursunay, given that they do that very often, at least governments can maybe develop some resources and tools to protect them when they are about to testify, before or after and during their testimony, to protect them. And also, I think beyond the camp survivors, to also allocate some funding or resources to really investigate each case of harassment, especially, online. And I think governments have a responsibility to protect these communities. As Sophie has said, where especially the community is very important, for example, in the US or in Europe and Turkey, some of these countries where these intimidation tactics are widespread. So I think this is also something that, of course, we ask governments to do. And I think this issue of reprisals and transnational repression is extremely important to look into. And I highly suggest also the audience or the viewers, if they want to, read more on that, you can also look at UHRP's report on transnational repression, which is also very comprehensive. Andrea, I don't know if you wanted to say anything on this specific issue. Rahima, okay, you have to go, but thank you so much for joining, and good luck with your next event. We'll continue.
Thank you.
Bye. So just that I agree with everything that Rahima and Sophie just said, and you as well, just what needs to be done. Just more attention, more resources from governments that say that they care. So in terms of following up on reprisals, protecting Uyghurs in the diaspora, and I think it's extremely important at this point for governments like the U.S. and like-mindeds to sort of speak with Michelle Bachelet about this upcoming visit, and just sort of impress upon her, what she needs to do and what she needs to not do while she's in Beijing. I think it's very important that there is some proactive sort of interventions with her in her office before she goes to China. So we'll see about that.
I think a briefing with her just before she goes, because I think it is even unacceptable that she's not engaging meaningfully with civil society, especially the Uyghur civil society groups. I mean, we're plenty, and we're working on this issue at the UN, and she needs to engage with groups like ours to make sure that she respects our demands and as a community. And I think it's just that she didn't do that.
Absolutely.
No, I think sorry, I don't need to beat this dead horse this morning, but it's not like it's far from Geneva to Munich. It's not like the community hasn't sent plenty of very, very able advocates to Geneva. It's not as if there's a lack of information. I think the very least, with a very heavy emphasis on very, the High Commissioner must do right now is visit the communities in Turkey and Germany and Australia and talk to them and show that it is their interests, their concerns, their nightmare that she's trying to end, and not trying to make life easier for the perpetrators of atrocity crimes. That's her job.
Yeah, exactly. And she is failing at her job at the moment.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Sorry to have originally focused on governments, but absolutely. NGOs, the Uyghur diaspora, it's a must. I have a question for you two. Do you all have any idea if she is running? Is she planning to go for a second term?
Yes.
She is. Ah, okay. That's important.
That might play, a role in.
Yes. And I think,
yeah. So maybe just, to come back on our topic, because we can, I think, talk about this all day, and we've done it privately, I think, with Sophie many times. But I wanted to ask you maybe both, as we're talking about Uyghur and Turkic women, they have, they're facing violence in both the public and private spaces. So, and how do you think that has contributed to the acceleration of the oppression by the Chinese authorities against the Uyghur and Turkic people as a whole? And then maybe to Andrea specifically, what is the aim of the Chinese government in forcing interethnic marriages between Uyghur Turkic women and Han Chinese men? Which, I mean, I think you've answered a little bit in your introduction, but I think it would be good to hear. Yeah, first of all, like, how has this, violence that women face contributed to the entire oppression of Uyghur and Turkic people as a whole? If we can start with that question. Maybe Sophie, to start it off.
Sorry, I'm trying to control a phone that's beyond my reach. Well, I think the environment that is conducive to, for example, sexual or gender-based violence, is one of general oppression. The lack of access to services like access to information, access to medical care, the rule of law, free media. I think it was the inimitable Professor Gay McDougall, then serving on the, help, Andrea, on which committee in August of 2018?
CERD.
Thank you. On the CERD committee, who first characterized the Uyghur region as a rights-free zone.
Right.
And, when you think about the ecosystem or the environment of rights that need to be present to protect people from sexual or gender-based violence, all of those are absent, I think, not just across the region, but especially in conditions of arbitrary detention, where people are being held by authorities who don't have the authority to hold them, who can't be identified to, pursue any sort of redress against them, and where the rules are whatever the powerful want, and there are no protections for people who are vulnerable. So it's, I think the one is sort of a microcosm briefly of the other. And, one does not see any of the kinds of protections in place that you would want to see to prevent this kind of violence. And just to add on to all of that, the shocking discrimination that's shown through, legal and medical systems across China towards ethnic communities, non-Han communities, that I think, makes all of these realities worse, in addition to, having a very weak set of laws around things like domestic violence or gender-based discrimination. All of these problems exacerbate what happens across the region. But Andrea, I'm sure will have better ideas to share.
No, I think that no, those are all excellent points, Sophie. I mean, it is an environment of impunity for Han officials, for Han people generally, right? So, the Uyghurs are just, particularly Uyghur women, are disempowered. mean, of course, they are also very resilient and resourceful. We've heard and we know so many incredible stories, but in the end, in terms of protecting their rights, there's very little that they can do. There's absolutely very little that they can do. They are in the Uyghur region. They are systematically, if you went through the UDA, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and look, sort of article by article, you would see that Uyghur women and then the larger Uyghur community and Kazakh community, none of those rights are being respected, right? They are being violated left and right, right to culture, cultural rights, language rights, right to not be arbitrarily detained, right to not be tortured. The list goes on, right? So these, and rights to education, to be able to educate your child in ways that that are consistent with your sort of ideas about education and culture, et cetera, et cetera. So, religious freedom, one by one, they are all being violated. So there's that. And then also, again, just going back to the general sort of environment of fear. I mean, this is fear in the camps, fear outside the camps, surveillance both in and outside. Again, referencing Darren Byler's work. I mean, this is just, it's a rights-free zone, and it's also a zone where there's essentially no privacy and no sort of agency or autonomy over personal decisions, right? Like, fundamentally, intimate, fundamental decisions like marriage, right? And protection and being able to protect, or being able to sort of have protection over your body. There was no one that Uyghur women can turn to, right, for that. So anyway, just those were just a few additional thoughts. And I just think between now and May, we should be doing a lot of brainstorming, right, about, and I know you all have already started to do that, like what we, are sort of demanding from her. And it's good. It's interesting to know that she is, that she's seeking a second term as High Commissioner. Also, we shouldn't forget about our dear friend, Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He also needs to be, I think, part of this discussion, right? So anyway.
Absolutely. I think the three of us are very much UN focused and this discussion, but I think we realize and acknowledge the importance of UN as a platform where,
yes.
Especially for human rights defenders whose rights have been blatantly violated. For us, it should be a safe space and a great opportunity to defend and also demand our rights to be protected. But in recent years, we've seen from experience that it has become the opposite, that it is a space where we're actually being, at risks and retaliated against. And it's become this risky place for human rights defenders to go because we are confronted with so many challenges and facing the oppressor in this space where they're not afraid and they don't shy away from right to replies to anything that these human rights defenders say. And so I think we've realized that the UN has lost a little bit of its credibility, especially, with the recent behaviors, like today's behavior, I suppose, from the High Commissioner, which make us question, the usefulness of such platform if it cannot if we cannot offer this safe space that it aims to do for human rights defenders. So maybe, as like one of the last questions that I wanted to ask to close off today's discussion was, and maybe on a positive note as well, is how can we ensure that we are indeed uplifting the voices of these survivors and human rights activists and protect them at the same time as well?
Summertime, maybe I could jump in. But first of all, I want to echo what Rahima and Andrea have said earlier about the extraordinary courage that so many people across the community and particularly women have demonstrated in sharing deeply traumatic experiences again and again and again, in pursuit of some kind of justice or accountability or relief. And I think every time, we see people do that, we feel that much more of an obligation to try to make that a reality. And I think, the information and the perspectives that women have already shared about what's happened to them, should be received and treated as evidence for the prosecution. And that to honor and uphold their courage in doing that, our job is to make that a reality. We would be absolutely nothing without, the stories that Uyghur women have been willing to share with us. And we are astonished at that vote of confidence and grateful. Our obligation in return is to try to make something better happen as a result. I think we feel we carry those stories with us and have a debt to pay in turning them into real justice. And that's really our top priority, to make that happen. We try very hard to share people's work and make sure that, that it is people from the community who are talking to journalists, or, we are trying to draw attention to books that have been published. I'm really glad that Gulbahar Hadiwaji's book has now been published in English, which is great. But there's a lot more work to do, I think, in making sure that this community gets relief and in sort of the legal and the moral sense can be made whole again, to the extent that that's possible.
Andrea?
Bravo. Two quick things. In terms of hope, I was, right, so again, coming back to Torsene, I mean, she was just amazing yesterday, right? I mean, so she has suffered so much, and she is telling her story again and again and again, each time, being sort of re-traumatized, but also gaining courage and more confidence, more strength by telling her story. So, right, to the extent we can continue to amplify her story and others' stories, we should be doing so. Absolutely, right? And one thing that I was so pleased to hear when she was talking about about courage and how she's becoming more courageous, she mentioned Ukraine, right? She said, that she was so inspired, right, by how courageous the Ukrainians are, right? And that their courage gave her courage, so she's, more emboldened to speak. Meanwhile, she's, of course, tearing, a translator. I mean, everybody, you cannot listen to these stories and not start, not become teary-eyed, right? Or just feel it in your gut, just again and again and again. One thing I also do want to mention that in her CCC testimony towards the end, she also spent, quite a bit of time to talk about how important it is, for the community, not only, right, to get just more people out and here, more quickly and get sort of their, speaking from the perspective of the U.S. and get, processing asylum applications, but also the absolute importance of getting mental health counseling and just trauma counseling, right, for this community, and not just the camp survivors, but Uyghurs in exile, right, so the diaspora too, right. So she mentioned that as well. So I think, one thing that I haven't really thought this through at all, but it just sort of kind of just an idea that popped into my head in terms of what can we do that's an alternative, because the UN certainly is not helping matters. I wonder to what extent we could think about setting up something like another NGO tribunal that focuses specifically on violations of women's rights and sexual, and with an additional sort of emphasis on gender-based violence and women, Uyghur women, just something, again, something, it doesn't have to be maybe sort of as grandiose as, the Uyghur Tribunal, in London. They also looked at so many different issues, and it was clearly designed to come to a particular, or kind of looking at evidence to to weigh whether or not, to what extent crimes against humanity were being committed against the Uyghurs and other Turkic communities in the Uyghur region, and of course also the determination of genocide. But I wonder if there's something like that, an NGO sort of, an unofficial tribunal that could have similar sort of similar dynamic, also in light of the fact that China will be undergoing its CEDAW review, right? Probably next year. So that's something that could also feed into China's review by the Committee Against the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women next year.
Thank you so much. And maybe just last thing that I wanted to ask you, I think, Andrea, you gave some recommendations in the beginning, but maybe Sophie, you would like to also, since we're talking about uplifting voices, I wanted to see if you had anything to share in terms of recommendations for, for a book or, audio, podcast, anything about this topic.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, I think Gulbahar's book is extraordinary. I read it all in one go, which I do with almost nothing more than paragraphs these days. But the UHRP, bless you, has done wonderful thing about Uyghur women scholars, and I think being knowledgeable about that, and some people like Professor Joshua Freeman have put together translations. I've always been amazed by people who translate poetry and manage to capture in different languages the essence.
Yeah, he's incredible. He's incredible.
And he's done some translations of some beautiful work written by Uyghur women poets. And that's, I think, some of the kind of material that we can go to look for inspiration, along with just an extraordinary community of women whose army I would happily march in any day.
Andrea, did you have any additional recommendations, or?
I had, I just posted, there's, this foreign policy article, an article on foreign policy that I thought was great. I love the title, Uyghur Women Are China's Victims and the Resistance, right? So it's a wonderful piece from March 2021, and just sort of highlighting Uyghur women's stories and precisely that, both what they've suffered and how they're resisting, and just how incredibly courageous they are.
Thank you. And maybe if I can add my own recommendation, well, I wanted to, recommend the audience to meet my colleague and Zubaida Shamsuddin, who's with the Uyghur Human Rights Project, but she's also the vice president of the World Uyghur Congress, and she's published an op-ed today in The Diplomat.
Great. Oh, yes.
On Women's Day, there is nothing for Uyghur women to celebrate, so I think it's a very compelling op-ed that we must read. So that is my recommendation. And for the audience, we will gather all these recommendations and compile them somewhere. So stay tuned. So that brings us to the end of our discussion. I want to thank each one of you for giving us your very precious time on this very day.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for making my job easy. And I also wanted to highlight the fact that it is with allies like yourselves that we will find solutions for crises like these, that we must work together in these hard circumstances. And I think the more the merrier. And when we brainstorm together, I think we can achieve incredible things, and that has been proven very successful in the past few years. So I think joining forces in these incredibly hard times is what we need, and that's how we will achieve greater results. So again, thank you so much for joining me on this 2022 International Women's Day. I also want to thank WC and also UHRP for organizing this event jointly. So this will be saved, and I wish everyone a great day.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks so much. Great to see you.